Werewolves! We love them, don't we? And I'm not sure whether it's fair to posit the question, are you a werewolf person or are you a vampire person? Because as horror fans, we don't have to choose, do we? The truth is, similar to their cinematic counterparts, werewolves in literature have also had a bum deal when compared to the vast abundance and intricacies of vampires in literature. I mean, it's the age-old battle for a reason, right? Vampires, werewolves. However, thankfully for us, compared to their silver screen companions, werewolves of the page have seen a myriad of hidden gems, some of which may take you by surprise. So let's take a look, shall we? Hello horror fans, what's going on? And once again, welcome back to the Scary channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos. As per usual, I'll be your horror host, Jack Finch, as today we curiously take a look at the top 5 scariest werewolves in literature. Roll the clip. Damn! I love that movie, and for the curious amongst you, that clip was from 2004's Van Helsing, starring Hugh Jackman and Kate Beckinsale, and you know what? I don't care what anybody says, that movie was awesome. Also, it's absolutely insane how good the werewolves were in that movie. They well and truly nailed it, from both the physicality of how they moved and their primal half-man, half-wolf homogeny. So yeah, so there we have it, Van Helsing. Oh yeah, and then there's the whole Dracula thing, but you know that already. Anyway, on with the show. Kicking off at number 5, The Pack from The Pack. And yeah, because I'm not sure what else we could exactly call them. The thing is, I think it's best that we kick off this list with an otherwise undiscovered gem, because for the most part when it comes to werewolves in literature, you have to do a little digging to find anything that's worth its salt, or fur, I guess. In The Pack, written by Paul Hinton and released back in 2013, werewolves, although still depicted in their traditional form, kind of are an entirely different force of nature. If you'd like an idea as to the bones of this novel, picture 30 Days of Night but put werewolves in it and then stick it in a small town in England. The Pack tells a tale of a fictional town called Whitchurch, tucked in the idyllic landscape of rural England. However, in this little town it has a very bizarre history, soaked in blood and the misfortune of an ancient curse. You see, every 15 years a vicious pack of werewolves that are genuinely terrifying in parts, may I add, are unleashed upon Whitchurch to feast upon the locals. And yeah, as you may imagine, that's exactly how this novel kicks off. Listen, I can't exactly heap a huge amount of praise on the actual technical construction of this novel, because for the most part Hinton's style is incredibly simplistic and the dialogue heavy nature of the novel is dragging in parts, but honestly, the werewolves in this novel are awesome, and it's worthwhile just to experience that. They're unlike pretty much every other werewolf in literature. They're like a force of nature, more akin to the vampires of 30 Days of Night than anything else. Also, if you enjoyed Neil Marshall's awesome movie Dog Soldiers, then you will adore this book. It's got the same British charm to it and a similar set of true grit characters. Yeah, The Pack. It's worth a read. Swinging in at number 4, Reverend Lowe, The Cycle of the Werewolf. And yeah, we can't really make this list without giving reference to the main man himself, Stephen King. You see, out of all of the entries on this list, Stephen King's The Cycle of the Werewolf is perhaps the most traditional depiction of lycanthropy. And yeah, I'm not entirely sure how he does it, because much like with the vampires in Salem's Lot, King manages to turn such a traditional horror trope into a completely different vessel for fear. But hey, I guess that's why he's the king of horror, right? For those of you that haven't yet read The Cycle of the Werewolf, please do. It's a fantastic read. It's short enough to get through in a single sitting, and conceptually speaking, it's the definition of what being a werewolf is. Also, yes, this is the King novel that 1985's Silver Bullet starring Corey Haim was based upon, so if it seems familiar, that's why. Written by Stephen King and illustrated by Bernie Ritson, The Cycle of the Werewolf is told across 12 chapters, each of them depicting a month of the calendar in the small town of Tarker's Mills, Maine. The story is told through the eyes of a 10-year-old boy, Marty Coslaw, who is paraplegic and wheelchair bound, and also the only one in his town who knows that a ravenous werewolf is murdering people every full moon. It doesn't take him long to realise that the werewolf is none other than Reverend Lester Lowe, the town's priest, although he himself isn't exactly aware. The thing is, the story is actually really sad, and King manages to walk a fine line between the bestial rage of the werewolf and the tragic realization of Reverend Lowe's curse. The origin of his lycanthropy is never fully explained, and that serves to hammer home the tragedy of his affliction, juxtaposed by the genuinely gut-wrenching physicalities of his killing spree. Yeah, this one is Werewolf 101. Next up at number 3, the lupine theriomorph, the Dresden Files. And yeah, something that isn't Werewolf 101 at all, because who better to completely reinvent the werewolf on several different levels than Jim Butcher himself. Now listen, you may be aware that we're big fans of the Dresden Files over here at Top 5 Scary Videos, but if you know, then you know, because the theriomorphs of the Dresden Files are awesome. And also, we have to hammer down the specifics here because there's quite a few versions of the traditional werewolf as far as budget is concerned, much like with his varying depictions of vampires, as is the case with the Four Courts. In the world of Harry Dresden, there are several types of werewolf, otherwise known as lupine theriomorphs. There are the classic werewolves, which function exactly as they do in Gothic literature, terrible magic curse. You get the drift. But then there are the Hexen wolves, a type of lichen magic that allows a person to transform into a wolf-like beast through the use of a magical talisman imbued by another user. To transform, a person makes use of a talisman which can be worn and activated, and then, yeah, instant werewolf, or FBI werewolf. Usually it's a wolf hide bat, which are a pretty important resource in the world of Harry Dresden. Then there are the loup-garous, which are also incredibly similar to the classic werewolves, but instead are created by a much more powerful type of magic and are reliant on the older dodge of the silver bullet variety. The loup-garous are essentially the resulting creation if you make enemies with really powerful sorcerers. And then there are the lycanthropes, which are essentially the anamorphic feather in Butcher's werewolf cap. As depicted in Full Moon, lycanthropes are not created but born, and for all intents and purposes are perhaps the most powerful lycans in the series. However, we're irking on spoilers here, but there are a few more versions of things in Butcher's series, which, you know, is reason enough to give it a read. Coming in at number 2, the Wolfen, Warhammer 40k. Okay guys, talk about diverging from the path of classic werewolfism. Of course it had to be the staggering canon of the grim darkness of Warhammer 40k to deliver us a completely insane depiction of the stereotypical werewolf. Because what happens when you cross an ancient race of lichen men with a space marine? Yeah, the Wolfen, that's exactly what you get. And if you know anything about the vast lore behind Warhammer 40k, you'll know that these guys are one of the most savage and frighteningly efficient fighting forces in the whole of the Space Marines. And also the creation of the Wolfen is something else entirely, so much so I'm pretty sure there is nothing else like it in werewolf fiction. Although it is kind of close to the Trial of the Grasses in the Witcher series, which is pretty cool actually, and another reason to read The Witcher. As described in texts of the Terran Empire, the Wolfen are members of the Space Wolves chapter who have succumbed to the curse of the Wolfen and thus transformed into savage, malformed lupine mutants. Genetically engineered creations within every Space Wolf's gene seed is a specific genetic sequence known as the Canis helix, which unleashes the acute predatory sense of a race of creatures known as Fenrisian wolves, the native species of the Wolfen's homeworld, Fenris. Yeah, exactly, because how do you get an entire army of genetically engineered and technologically superior werewolf soldiers in the Warhammer universe? You create an entire planet of them. Now obviously if you're familiar with the series, you'll know that the Space Wolves are an incredibly powerful sect of Space Marines and by extension a critical arm of the Empire, but in this case Space Wolves is very much indeed taken literally. Space werewolves. There we have it. And finally coming in at number 1 spot, Karkaroth, the Silmarillion. Because yes, there is one werewolf that all others tremble at the very mention of, and surprisingly enough, it comes from an incredibly well-known series that isn't exactly renowned for its depiction of gothic horror tropes. J.R.R. Tolkien's legendary work of fantasy, The Lord of the Rings, was built upon by a very important side compendium, his 1977 posthumous novel, The Silmarillion, and we have that to thank for fully fleshing out Tolkien's world of Arda and the incredibly rich and in-depth lore of the First and Second Ages. In many ways, The Silmarillion is considered to be the Eda or the Bible of the Lord of the Rings, and any such creation story in turn needs to have its villain. That villain is a figure known as Morgoth, the progenitor of all evil in Arda, and the one responsible for creating some of the most vile evils in the whole of Middle-earth. One of those is Ungoliant, the giant spider and mother of Shelob, and the other is Draugluin, the first of the werewolves. But in this case, they both pale in comparison to the power of Karkaroth, offspring of Draugluin, and the greatest and most powerful werewolf to have ever lived. Otherwise known as the Red Maw and the Jaws of Thirst, his eyes burn like red coals and his teeth were poisoned as the spears of the Orcish legions. He was reared by Morgoth as a line of defense against Huan, the White Wolfhound of the Valar, and was charged with defending the Gate of Angband, where he eventually went on a madness-induced warpath, slaying everything and anything that stood in his path. You see, the thing is, although Tolkien's depiction of werewolves aren't exactly in line with many of the other mechanics of the creatures, they are the literal definition of the primal rage and bestial wrath that werewolves represent. These werewolves aren't trapped men, but instead they're servants of evil itself, bred by Morgoth from wolves and then inhabited by spirits of pure evil. And Karkaroth? Yeah. He's the baddest of them all. Well, there we have it, horror fans, our list for the top 5 scariest werewolves in literature. What do you guys think? Do you agree, disagree? Have any more to add to this list? Then let us know your thoughts down in the comment section below, as well as any choice picks of your own. Before we depart from today's video though, let's first take a quick look at some of your more creative comments from over the past few days. First up, Matthew Payton says, "Hey Jack, I grew up in a town called Rawlins, Wyoming. In that town, a horror B movie was made there. It's called Prison and it stars Viggo Mortensen. Give it a watch." Hey Matthew, you know what? That sounds absolutely awesome. Growing up in small towns, Viggo Mortensen, yeah, I'm sold already. Also, anything with Viggo in has got my vote. I love that guy. And finally, Michael Burke says, "Jack Finch looking sharp with a fresh cut. Keep up the good work, guys. Your fans really appreciate you." Hey, you know what, Michael Burke? Thank you, buddy. You got to keep it as fresh as possible, right? But to be honest, I don't really have a lot of luck with hair, so thanks. Much appreciated, my man. You have a great day. Well, on that note, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today's video. Cheers for sticking around all the way until the end. If you were a fan of this video, or just top 5 scary videos in general, then please be a dear and hit that thumbs up button, as well as that subscribe bell. And I'll be seeing you in the next one. As per usual, I've been your horror host, Jack Finch. You've been watching top 5 scary videos, and until next time, you take it easy.